All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to get into some pretty deep constitutional theory, but we're going to do it by telling a simple story. It's about a kingdom, a tree, and 4 friends. And believe me, it's a really fascinating way to understand what happens when a country's rules start to feel, well, not quite real anymore.
So just think about this for a second. What if you're playing a game, right? But the referee could change the rules whenever they wanted, right in the middle of a play. 1 second a move is fine, the next it gets you kicked out of the game. How could you ever play? How could you ever trust the outcome? This question right here is the absolute heart of everything we're about to explore.
And that leads us to this core idea, the color of law. It's such a powerful concept. It's what happens when a system has all the things that look like law, the courts, the fancy robes, the official-looking documents, but underneath it all, the actual foundation just isn't there. The rules are just law-colored, see? They're built on opinions that can change any time, not on solid, predictable law.
So, to really get what happens when things go wrong, we first have to see how they're supposed to work when they're going right. So let's step into our story, into a kingdom where the law is real, it's strong, and most importantly, it's clear. So, in the middle of this kingdom, there was this giant, magnificent tree of law. Now, what's so cool about this metaphor is that the tree isn't making the rules. It's a mirror. It reflects the health of the society. When the people were truthful and fair with each other, the tree was vibrant and strong. It was like a living report card for justice in the kingdom.
So who kept this kingdom and its incredible trees so healthy? Well, it was protected by 3 friends. Let's meet the first one. Her name was Meaning.
Meaning's whole job was to make sure that words were stable, that they didn't just wobble around. When she spoke the truth, her voice literally glowed. When people made promises, a ribbon of light would wrap around them. In legal theory, this has a name, semantic invariance. It's a fancy way of saying that important words like fairness or justice have a fixed, reliable meaning you can count on.
Okay, the second protector of the kingdom was a very thoughtful boy named Reason.
Now, Reason didn't have magical powers. What he had were tools: a compass to find the most logical path, a lamp to shine a light on confusing situations, and a ruler to help people think in a straight, clear line. These tools, they represent a consistent logical process. Theorists call this rational invariance. It just means the way you make decisions doesn't change based on your mood. And finally, we have our third friend, Justice, who was always calm, always steady.
Justice had one simple but incredibly powerful tool, a set of scales that were always perfectly balanced. Her entire purpose was to make sure fairness was predictable, that it was universal. Her scales didn't care if you were rich or poor, powerful or not. They only cared about what was right. This is what's known as normative invariance, the principle that justice itself is a constant.
So, you've got meaning, reason, and justice. A perfect system, right? What could possibly go wrong? Well, there was a 4th friend, a playful, curious, and very different kind of friend, a swirl of wind named Delta. And this is where the whole story pivots. With a single, seemingly harmless whisper, Delta introduces this totally radical idea. What if the rules weren't set in stone? What if a word could stretch just a little? This is the birth of what the theory calls semantic drift, and it all starts with this simple, playful little question. That one question starts to pull a thread that unravels, well, pretty much everything. Let's see how this one little whisper builds into a full-blown crisis, what the story calls the night of the great tilt.
So first, the words start to wobble. A promise to do something soon now means maybe never. A rule to be fair suddenly means fair to me, but not to you. And as the very foundations, meaning reason and justice, start to erode, that huge tree of law, the symbol of their entire stable system, it literally begins to tilt.
Now, what's so incredible here is how perfectly this story maps onto the formal constitutional theory. This isn't just a fairy tale, it's a model. The process happens in 3 phases. First, there's the quiet drift, where things start to slip. Then comes lock-in. This is when the new, wobbly meanings actually become the new normal, and the system can't fix itself. And finally, breakdown. The tree cracks and the whole system just collapses into chaos.
This line from the story, man, it just says it all, doesn't it? This isn't just about legal definitions in some dusty book. When words lose their anchor, trust just evaporates. And when a society loses trust in its own rules, in its own institutions, the entire world feels like it's tilting right off its axis.
Okay, so we've heard the story. It's a powerful one. Now, let's pull back the curtain and connect this beautiful fable directly to the formal, real-world framework that it represents.
This slide just lays it out so clearly. On the left, you've got the kingdom, how it started. A system with invariants. That just means things are fixed. Meaning is stable. Reason is consistent. Justice is universal. And the tree stands straight. On the right, you have the world after delta shows up. Everything drifts, it bends, it depends on the situation, and the tree tilts. It's a perfect visual for the shift from a system of law to a system of color of law.
And here we finally get the formal definition of our fourth friend. Delta, that playful swirl of wind, is a character representing a pretty complex idea. Delta, or Doctrine-Controlled Purpose Selection. In simple terms, it's the mechanism that lets decision-makers, like judges or politicians, interpret the rules based on the outcome they want, on their doctrine, instead of a fixed principle. They get to change the rules of the game as they play it.
And all of this brings us to the formal diagnosis, the so what of it all. And it's pretty stark. The story isn't just a story, it illustrates these critical findings. First, that without those fixed foundations, those invariants we talked about, the rule of law simply cannot function. Second, that delta, this idea of changing the rules as you go, becomes the real power, not the Constitution itself. And finally, and this is the big one, any system governed by delta will, inevitably, head towards collapse.
Which leaves all of us with a final, really powerful question. In the story, the three friends realize they have to go on a new quest, a quest to find the roots of real law, the deep, unmoving foundations way down below the tilting tree. And that really is the challenge, isn't it? If an entire system is tilting, if the whole world feels unsteady, where do you even begin to look for solid ground?